At the Mother's Day dinner, my daughter smashed my plate and shouted, "Stop making noise when you eat, you disgusting woman!" Everyone laughed at me. The next day, the person who knocked on her door made her go pale. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." My name is Belinda, and I'm 67 years old. 3 years ago, I thought moving in with my daughter Gaia after my husband passed would bring us closer together. I was so terribly wrong. That Mother's Day dinner will haunt me for the rest of my life. I can still hear the sound of my plate shattering against the hardwood floor, the pieces scattering like my dignity across Gaia's pristine dining room. "Stop making noise when you eat, you disgusting woman. I can't stand you anymore." Those words came from my own daughter, my only child, the little girl I'd carried for 9 months, raised through sleepless nights, supported through college, and defended when the world seemed against her. I was sitting at the far end of the table, not even at the main seats where Gaia, her husband Marcus, and his brothers sat. They'd placed me at the corner like an unwelcome afterthought, which should have been my first warning about how this evening would unfold. I'd been trying so hard to be quiet while eating the soup Gaia had served me in a chipped bowl while everyone else had the good china. My dentures sometimes click when I eat certain foods, something I've become self-conscious about since moving in here. I thought I was being careful, but apparently not careful enough for Gaia's standards. When she suddenly stood up and swept my bowl off the table, sending soup and ceramic flying, I felt my heart stop. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus and his brothers, Kevin and Danny, stared for a moment before Kevin started chuckling. "Damn, Gaia, you really let her have it," Danny said, shaking his head with amusement. Marcus just smirked and continued eating, like watching his wife humiliate an elderly woman was perfectly normal dinner entertainment. I sat there frozen, soup dripping from my cardigan, pieces of the bowl around my feet. My hands were shaking so badly I had to hide them under the table. The worst part wasn't even the broken dish or the mess. It was the look in Gaia's eyes. Pure disgust. Like I was something revolting that had crawled into her perfect life. "Clean it up," she said coldly, not even looking at me anymore. "And use the paper towels from the kitchen. Don't touch my good ones." I wanted to say something. I wanted to stand up for myself, to remind her that this was supposed to be Mother's Day, that I was her mother, that I deserved basic respect. Instead, I got down on my hands and knees and started picking up the pieces while they continued their dinner conversation as if nothing had happened. My knees ached against the hard floor. These old bones weren't made for crawling around cleaning up messes like a servant. As I gathered the ceramic shards, I caught fragments of their conversation. "Did you see Sarah's new car?" Gaia was saying to Marcus. "I think we should look at getting something similar. The Honda is getting old." They were talking about buying a new car while I cleaned their mess off the floor. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the one who'd helped them with the down payment on this house 3 years ago when Gaia convinced me to move in. "We'll take care of each other," she'd said then. Family helps family. What a joke that turned out to be. When I finally stood up, my back screaming in protest, Gaia didn't even acknowledge that I'd finished. She was laughing at something Kevin had said. Her whole face lit up with joy. I hadn't seen her look that happy when talking to me in months. I excused myself quietly and went to my room, the smallest bedroom in the house, the one that used to be Gaia's craft room before I moved in. She'd made it clear it was a temporary arrangement, just until I got back on my feet. 3 years later, I'm still here, and it's become increasingly obvious that I'm not a family member in this house. I'm a burden they're stuck with. Sitting on my narrow bed, still in my soup-stained cardigan, I stared at the photo on my nightstand. It was from Gaia's college graduation. She's beaming in her cap and gown, and I'm standing beside her, so proud, my arm around her shoulders. We looked happy then. We looked like mother and daughter. I tried to remember when things changed. Was it after Robert died? Was it gradual? Or did I just not notice the signs? Maybe Gaia had always seen me as an inconvenience, and I'd been too blind with motherly love to see it. The laughter from the dining room drifted down the hallway, and I felt more alone than I had since Robert's funeral. At least then, people had been kind to me. They'd brought casseroles and offered condolences. Here, in my own daughter's house, I felt like a ghost haunting rooms where I wasn't wanted. I changed into my nightgown even though it was only 8 o'clock. There was no point in going back out there. They were probably relieved to have their dinner party back to normal without the disgusting old woman making noise at their table. As I lay in bed, I wondered what my Robert would say if he could see how his precious daughter was treating me. He'd always been softer on Gaia than I thought he should be, but even he would be horrified by tonight. Little did I know that Robert had been planning for this exact scenario long before he died. The knock came at exactly 9:30 in the morning, sharp and authoritative. I was in the kitchen washing the breakfast dishes, my dishes, since Gaia had made it clear that cleaning up after myself was my responsibility. She and Marcus had already left for work, leaving me alone in the house as usual. I dried my hands on the dish towel and shuffled to the front door, wondering who could be visiting. We never had unexpected guests. Gaia didn't like surprises, and she certainly didn't like anyone seeing me in my state, as she called it. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a dark suit holding a briefcase. My first thought was that he was selling something, but something about his posture suggested this was official business. "Mrs. Belinda Morrison?" he asked when I opened the door. "Yes, that's me." "My name is Thomas Wright. I'm an attorney with Caldwell, Wright & Associates. I'm looking for Ms. Gaia Morrison Fletcher. Is she available?" My stomach dropped. "She's at work. Is everything all right? Is she in some kind of trouble?" Mr. Wright's expression softened slightly when he looked at me. "No, ma'am, nothing like that. This concerns an inheritance matter. I've been trying to reach Ms. Morrison Fletcher for several weeks, but she hasn't returned my calls. An inheritance?" I was confused. Robert had left everything to me, and I'd already settled his estate years ago. From whom? From Robert Morrison, her father. There's a secondary provision in his will that's now come into effect. He paused, studying my face. "Mrs. Morrison, did you know your husband had a separate trust fund established specifically for your daughter?" I stared at him, completely baffled. "I don't understand. Robert and I went through everything with the lawyer after he died. There was no separate trust. This trust was established privately through our firm 5 years before Mr. Morrison's passing. It was designed to remain confidential until certain conditions were met." Mr. Wright glanced around uncomfortably. "Mrs. Morrison, might I come in? This is rather sensitive information, and I believe you should hear it as well." I led him to the living room, the same room where I'd been humiliated last night. He sat in the chair where Kevin had been laughing at me, and I took the spot on the couch where I usually sat when Gaia allowed me to watch television with them. "Mrs. Morrison?" Mr. Wright began, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick folder. "Your husband established a trust fund worth approximately $450,000 specifically for your daughter. However, he included a very specific clause." My hands started trembling. $450,000? Robert had never mentioned anything like this to me. "What kind of clause?" "The inheritance is contingent upon Ms. Morrison Fletcher's treatment of you, her mother. Specifically, if she is found to have engaged in elder abuse, neglect, or persistent mistreatment of you, the inheritance is voided, and the funds revert to you instead." The room started spinning. I gripped the arm of the couch to steady myself. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Mr. Wright leaned forward, his voice gentle but clear. "Your husband was apparently concerned about how your daughter might treat you as you aged, particularly if you became dependent on her care. He established this trust as both an incentive for good behavior and a protection for you." I felt like I couldn't breathe. Robert knew. He knew how Gaia was? "There's a letter here that explains his reasoning," Mr. Wright said, pulling out an envelope with my name written in Robert's familiar handwriting. "He instructed me to give this to you if the conditions of the trust were ever investigated." With shaking hands, I took the letter. The envelope was heavier than I expected, and I could feel multiple pages inside. Just seeing Robert's handwriting again brought tears to my eyes. "Mr. Wright," I whispered, "what exactly triggers an investigation into these conditions?" "Several things. Reports from neighbors, medical professionals, social services, or..." He paused. "A request from you. Your husband gave you the right to activate this clause at any time if you felt you were being mistreated. And if the clause is activated, an investigation would be conducted. If mistreatment is confirmed, Ms. Morrison Fletcher forfeits the entire inheritance, and it becomes yours instead. Additionally, there are provisions for your housing and care that would take effect immediately. I sat there in stunned silence. All this time, I thought I was trapped here, dependent on Gaia's grudging charity. But Robert had seen this coming. He'd known his daughter better than I thought he did. Has Ms. Morrison Fletcher been informed about this trust? I asked. I've left several messages requesting she contact me about an inheritance matter, but she hasn't responded. That's actually what brought me here today. I needed to attempt personal service of the notification. She gets her voicemails, I said quietly. She just doesn't return calls from numbers she doesn't recognize. Mr. Wright nodded. That's quite common. Mrs. Morrison, I have to ask. And please know that anything you tell me is confidential unless you choose to move forward. Has your daughter's treatment of you been appropriate? The question hung in the air. Last night's humiliation flashed through my mind. The broken plate, the soup-stained cardigan, crawling on the floor while they laughed. But it wasn't just last night. It was 3 years of being treated like an unwelcome guest in what was supposed to be my home. I need to think about this, I said finally. Of course. Here's my card. The letter from your husband might help you decide. He stood to leave, then turned back. Mrs. Morrison, I want you to know that your husband spoke about you often when we were setting this up. He loved you very much. Everything he did was to protect you. After Mr. Wright left, I sat holding Robert's letter, afraid to open it. Part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know what my husband had seen that I'd been blind to. But as I heard Gaia's car pulling into the driveway an hour early from work, I knew everything was about to change. She walked through the door and stopped dead when she saw the business card I'd left sitting on the coffee table. Who was here? She demanded, her face already flushing red. I looked up at my daughter, this woman who had broken my plate and called me disgusting just 12 hours ago, and for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't afraid of her anger. Someone you need to talk to very soon. Gaia snatched the business card from the coffee table like it was contaminated. Her face went through a series of expressions as she read it. Confusion, recognition, then something close to panic. Caldwell, Wright and Associates, she muttered. Why would a lawyer be here? What did you tell him? I stayed seated on the couch, Robert's letter still unopened in my lap. For the first time in 3 years, I had information that Gaia didn't. The power dynamic in this house had just shifted, and we both felt it. He was looking for you, I said calmly. Something about an inheritance from your father. Gaia's eyes widened. What inheritance? Dad left everything to you. We went through all of this already. Apparently not everything. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind racing. Gaia had always been calculating, even as a child. She was trying to figure out what this meant, what advantage she could gain from it. What exactly did he say? She asked, her tone shifting to the false sweetness she used when she wanted something. Why don't you call him and find out? The suggestion seemed to catch her off guard. The old Belinda would have immediately told her everything, would have been eager to share any news that might make Gaia happy, but I wasn't the old Belinda anymore. Last night's humiliation had changed something fundamental in me. Mom, she said, and the word sounded strange coming from her lips. She hadn't called me Mom in months. Did I do something to upset you? You seem different. I almost laughed. Did she really think I wouldn't remember being called disgusting in front of her husband's family? Did she think I'd forgotten crawling around on the floor, picking up broken ceramic while they continued their dinner? I'm fine, Gaia. Just tired. She studied my face, clearly unsatisfied with my answer. Well, I'll call this lawyer tomorrow. It's probably just some paperwork that got overlooked. That evening, I noticed the change immediately. Gaia made dinner, actually cooked, instead of heating up a frozen meal and leaving me to fend for myself. She set the table with her good china, including a proper place setting for me at the main table, not banished to the corner. I made your favorite, she said brightly, serving me a generous portion of pot roast. And I got that bread you like from the bakery. Marcus raised an eyebrow at his wife's sudden transformation but said nothing. He'd learned over the years not to question Gaia's moods too closely. This is lovely, dear, I said, taking a careful bite. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 3 years of being treated like an inconvenience, one visit from a lawyer had turned me back into a daughter worth caring for. "Mom, I've been thinking," Gaia continued, her voice unnaturally cheerful. "Maybe we should redecorate your room, make it more comfortable for you. What do you think?" "That's very thoughtful of you." She beamed at the praise, but I could see the calculation behind her smile. Whatever that inheritance was, it was significant enough to completely change her behavior overnight. After dinner, she insisted on doing the dishes herself. "You've done so much for this family, Mom. Let me take care of things tonight." I excused myself and went to my room, finally ready to read Robert's letter. My hands were steadier now than they'd been this morning. Having power, even if Gaia didn't know the extent of it yet, had given me a strength I'd forgotten I possessed. I opened the envelope carefully, unfolding 3 pages of Robert's neat handwriting. "My dearest Belinda," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you're living with Gaia and things have gone exactly as I feared they would." My breath caught. He'd known. Somehow, my husband had predicted this situation. "I've watched our daughter her entire life, and I've seen things that I know you've chosen not to see. You've always made excuses for her behavior, covered for her cruelties, believed she would grow out of her selfishness. I love her because she's our child, but I'm not blind to what she is." The words stung because they were true. I had made excuses. When Gaia was mean to other children, I told myself she was just assertive. When she manipulated situations to her advantage, I called it being clever. When she showed no empathy for others' pain, I convinced myself she was just focused on her own goals. I've established a trust that will give her financial security, but only if she treats you with the respect and care you deserve. If she fails in this basic human decency, the money goes to you instead. You'll have the resources to live independently and with dignity. There was more. Details about the trust, instructions for contacting Mr. Wright if I needed help, and even recommendations for senior living communities that he'd researched. But it was the final paragraph that brought tears to my eyes. "Belinda, you have spent your entire life putting others first. You sacrificed for me, for Gaia, for everyone around you, but you matter too. Your comfort matters. Your happiness matters. Don't let anyone, not even our daughter, convince you otherwise. You deserve to be treated with love and respect, and if Gaia can't give you that, then she doesn't deserve the gift I'm offering her." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Robert had given me a choice: stay and endure Gaia's mistreatment, or take control of my own life. But he'd also given Gaia a chance to prove she could be the daughter I'd always hoped she was. A soft knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. "Mom?" Gaia's voice was tentative. "Can I come in?" "Of course." She entered carrying a cup of tea, the good tea, the expensive kind she usually kept for herself. "I thought you might like this before bed." "Thank you, sweetheart." She sat on the edge of my bed, something she hadn't done since she was a child. "Mom, I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for our family. Moving in here, helping with the house payment, all of it. I know I don't say it enough." I sipped the tea and studied my daughter's face. She looked sincere, but there was something desperate in her eyes. She was afraid, though she didn't know exactly what she should be afraid of yet. "I appreciate that, Gaia. I was thinking we could spend more time together. Maybe go shopping this weekend, or see a movie. When's the last time we did something fun together?" I couldn't remember. In 3 years of living here, we'd never once done anything together that wasn't out of obligation. "That sounds nice," I said. She smiled and kissed my forehead before leaving. "Sweet dreams, Mom." As I got ready for bed, I realized that this sudden kindness should have made me happy. This was what I'd wanted for 3 years, to feel valued and loved by my daughter. But instead, I felt oddly detached. It was like watching a performance that I knew was fake, even if the actress was giving her best effort. Tomorrow, Gaia would call Mr. Wright and learn about the trust. She'd discover that her inheritance depended on treating me well. And then I'd see what she was really made of. Would this newfound kindness continue when she knew it was required, or would her true nature reassert itself? Either way, I was no longer the powerless old woman who'd crawled around picking up broken dishes while her family laughed. Robert had made sure of that. I heard Gaia on the phone with Mr. Wright the next morning while I was watering the plants on the back porch. Her voice carried through the kitchen window, and what started as polite inquiry quickly escalated to barely controlled panic. "What do you mean, treatment of my mother?" she was saying. "I take excellent care of her. She lives in my house. I provide all her meals." There was a long pause as Mr. Wright apparently explained the specifics of the trust. "That's ridiculous!" Gaia's voice cracked. "My father would never— Who made these accusations? Has someone been telling you lies about me?" Another pause. Longer this time. "An investigation? What kind of investigation? You can't just— This is harassment." I stayed outside, continuing to tend to the small garden I'd planted when I first moved in. Gaia had complained about it taking up space, but it was one of the few things that brought me joy in this house. Now I watered each tomato plant carefully, listening to my daughter's world crumble through the window. When she finally hung up, the silence was deafening. I gave her a few minutes before going back inside, where I found her sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. "Everything all right, dear?" I asked, though we both knew it wasn't. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Mom, that lawyer, he says Dad set up some kind of trust for me, but there are conditions attached to it." "What kind of conditions?" "About how I treat you." She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "It's insane. Dad apparently thought that I would— She couldn't finish the sentence. "That you would what, Gaia?" She spun around to face me. "Mistreat you. Can you believe that? As if I would ever hurt my own mother." The word hurt hung in the air between us. I thought about the broken plate, the name-calling, the 3 years of being made to feel like a burden. Was that not hurt in her mind? "I'm sure your father was just being cautious," I said carefully. "Cautious?" Gaia laughed bitterly. "He's basically accused me of elder abuse. And now this lawyer wants to conduct an investigation. He's going to interview neighbors, look at medical records, even talk to you about our relationship." I felt a flutter of something in my chest. Fear? Excitement? I wasn't sure. "He wants to talk to me?" "Yes. Mom, you have to help me here. You know I've been a good daughter, haven't I? Haven't I taken care of you?" The desperation in her voice was palpable. She needed me to validate her, to confirm that she'd been the loving daughter she believed herself to be. But as I looked at her face, I realized something shocking. Gaia genuinely didn't understand that her behavior had been cruel. In her mind, providing food and shelter was enough. The emotional abuse, the humiliation, the daily reminders that I was unwanted, none of that registered as mistreatment to her. "You've given me a place to live," I said finally. "Exactly. And I've fed you, made sure you had medical care when you needed it, included you in family activities." I almost laughed at that last part. Being relegated to the corner of the dinner table wasn't inclusion. It was tolerance, and barely that. "Gaia, what exactly did Mr. Wright tell you about this investigation?" She pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "He said they'll interview people who've observed our interactions. Mrs. Henderson next door. Apparently, she's already expressed some concerns. And Dr. Martinez, my doctor, has been asking questions about my living situation during my last few appointments." Mrs. Henderson was the elderly woman who lived next door. She'd witnessed Gaia yelling at me in the driveway several times, including once when Gaia accused me of embarrassing her in front of the mailman by wearing my old housecoat outside. I hadn't realized Mrs. Henderson had been concerned enough to mention it to anyone, and Dr. Martinez, he was the physician I'd been seeing since moving here. During my last visit, he'd asked careful questions about whether I felt safe at home, whether I was getting adequate nutrition, if I had any concerns about my living arrangements. At the time, I'd assumed it was routine questioning for an elderly patient. Now I realized he'd been screening for elder abuse. "What else did Mr. Wright say?" I asked. "He said the investigation could take weeks, and during that time, the trust is frozen. I can't access any of it until they determine whether—" She trailed off again. "Whether you've been mistreating me?" "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Mom, I need you to understand something. This inheritance, it's not just money. It's enough to pay off the house completely, to secure our future. Without it, she gestured around the kitchen. We've been living paycheck to paycheck. Marcus got passed over for that promotion last month. We need this money. For the first time, I understood the full scope of what Robert had done. He hadn't just created an incentive for Gaia to treat me well, he'd created a test. And he'd made sure the stakes were high enough that failing would have real consequences. What do you need from me? I asked. Relief flooded her face. Just tell them the truth. That I've been a good daughter, that you've been happy here, that we have a loving relationship. And is that the truth, Gaia? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Of course it is. Haven't you been happy here? I studied my daughter's face, looking for any sign that she genuinely didn't remember the cruelties, the humiliations, the constant reminders that I was a burden, but I saw something else instead, a flicker of uncertainty, as if she was starting to remember things she'd conveniently forgotten. I think, I said slowly, that Mr. Wright will ask me very specific questions about how you speak to me, how you treat me in front of others, whether I feel respected and valued in this home. Gaia's face went pale. Mom, you understand what's at stake here, right? This isn't just about money. This is about our family. Yes, I said, standing up from the table. It is about family. It's about what family really means. That afternoon, Mr. Wright called to schedule an interview with me for the following week. He was professional but kind, explaining that I could have a support person present if I wanted, and that everything I said would be confidential unless I chose to make it part of the official record. Mrs. Morrison, he said before we hung up, I want you to know that your husband was very specific about his concerns. He documented several incidents that worried him about your daughter's capacity for empathy and kindness. You're not being asked to betray anyone. You're being asked to advocate for yourself. After I hung up, I found Gaia standing in the doorway. She'd obviously been listening. What incidents? She asked, her voice tight. What did Dad document? I met her eyes steadily. Why don't you tell me what you think he might have documented? For the first time since this whole thing started, Gaia looked genuinely afraid. The week leading up to my interview with Mr. Wright was the strangest of my life. Gaia transformed overnight into the daughter I'd always dreamed of having. She brought me breakfast in bed, bought me new clothes, even suggested we get my hair done at her expensive salon. You deserve to be pampered. Mom, she said while brushing my hair one evening, I realize I haven't been showing you enough appreciation. It should have been wonderful. This was what I'd longed for during 3 years of feeling invisible and unwanted. But knowing it was motivated by fear of losing money made every gesture feel hollow. Marcus seemed confused by his wife's sudden devotion to me. Gaia's really going all out, he mentioned one morning when she'd left early to buy groceries for a special dinner she was planning. What's gotten into her? I just smiled and said nothing. Let him think his wife had experienced a genuine change of heart. The night before my interview, Gaia knocked on my bedroom door around 10 o'clock. I was already in my nightgown, reading one of the romance novels she'd bought me that week. Mom, can we talk? She sat on my bed, and I could see she'd been crying. Her carefully applied makeup was smudged, and her hands were shaking slightly. I'm scared, she admitted. Not just about the money, but about us, about our relationship. What about it? I've been thinking about the past few years, really thinking about it. And I'm starting to remember things I said and did that maybe weren't very nice. This was the closest she'd ever come to acknowledging her behavior. I waited to see if she'd go further. Like that night at dinner, Mother's Day, when She stopped, unable to say the words. I was having a bad day at work, and Marcus's brothers always stress me out, and I just snapped. But that's not an excuse. I shouldn't have taken it out on you. No, you shouldn't have. She flinched at my directness, but continued. And maybe there were other times when I was impatient with you, or made you feel unwelcome. I don't want you to think I don't love you, because I do. I studied her face in the lamplight. She looked young and vulnerable, like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything was forgiven and forgotten. Gaia, I said gently. Do you remember what you called me that night? She closed her eyes. Disgusting. I called you disgusting. In front of your husband's family. Yes. And how do you think that made me feel? Tears started flowing down her cheeks. Awful. Humiliated. Like you didn't matter. Do I matter to you, Gaia? Of course you do. You're my mother. But do I matter as a person? Not just as someone who gave birth to you and raised you, but as an individual human being who deserves respect and kindness? She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know if I ever thought about it that way. The honesty was devastating and refreshing at the same time. At least she wasn't pretending anymore. Mom, I know I can't undo the things I've said and done, but if you could find it in your heart to give me another chance, I swear I'll do better. I'll be the daughter you deserve. I reached over and took her hand. Gaia, I need you to understand something. Your father didn't create this trust to punish you. He created it to protect me. Yes, but also to give you an opportunity to become the person he hoped you could be. What do you mean? He saw your potential for kindness and love, but he also saw that you'd never be motivated to develop those qualities unless there were real consequences for not having them. She looked confused. So this is some kind of test? Everything in life is a test, sweetheart. The question is whether we learn from our failures or keep repeating them. The next morning, I sat across from Mr. Wright in his office. He was a kind man, probably in his 50s, with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The room was comfortable and private, with soft lighting and a view of a small garden. Mrs. Morrison, I want you to know that this conversation is completely confidential, unless you decide you want it to be part of the investigation record. My job is simply to understand your living situation and whether you feel safe and respected in your daughter's home. He asked me about my daily routine, my relationship with Gaia and Marcus, whether I had access to my own money and medical care, whether I felt free to come and go as I pleased. His questions were thorough, but not invasive. Then he asked about the Mother's Day incident. Several witnesses have mentioned an incident at dinner where your daughter became verbally aggressive with you. Can you tell me about that? I described what happened, including being called disgusting and having to clean up the broken plate while the family continued eating. Mr. Wright took careful notes. How did that make you feel? Humiliated, worthless. Like I was a burden they had to tolerate rather than a family member they loved. Was this an isolated incident or part of a pattern? This was the moment of truth. I could minimize it, make excuses for Gaia like I'd been doing her whole life. Or I could tell the complete truth about 3 years of emotional neglect and verbal cruelty. It was part of a pattern, I said quietly. A pattern that I enabled by not standing up for myself. Mr. Wright looked up from his notes. Mrs. Morrison, has your daughter's behavior toward you changed recently? Dramatically. Since you contacted her about the trust, she's been treating me like a queen. How does that make you feel? I thought about it carefully. Sad. If she was capable of kindness all along, it means she chose not to show it to me for 3 years. The only thing that changed was the threat of losing money. What would you like to see happen now? I took a deep breath. I'd like to see if my daughter can maintain this new behavior when she knows it's required, not just when she's afraid. If she can prove that she's genuinely changed, then maybe we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect. And if she can't, then my husband was right to protect me, and I'll need to protect myself. That evening, I came home to find Gaia waiting anxiously in the living room. How did it go? She asked immediately. It went fine. What did you tell him? I sat down across from her, looking at this woman who was my daughter, but felt like a stranger. I told him the truth. Gaia, all of it. Her face crumpled, and I knew she finally understood that her inheritance and our relationship hung in the balance of who she chose to be from this moment forward. Chapter 6. The Legacy. The call came on a Thursday morning, exactly 2 weeks after my interview. Mr. Wright's voice was professional but warm when he asked if I could come to his office that afternoon to discuss the investigation results. Gaia had been a nervous wreck for days, jumping every time the phone rang. Her newfound kindness had continued, but there was a frantic quality to it now, like someone trying desperately to convince a jury that had already heard all the evidence. "Mrs. Morrison," Mr. Wright said when I arrived at his office, "I've completed my investigation, and I need to discuss the findings with you before I contact your daughter." He opened a thick file on his desk. "Based on interviews with neighbors, medical professionals, and your own testimony, there's clear evidence of a pattern of emotional mistreatment." The Mother's Day incident was witnessed by 3 people, all of whom were disturbed by what they saw. I nodded, unsurprised but still feeling a weight in my chest. "However," he continued, "there's also evidence of recent significant changes in your daughter's behavior. Dr. Martinez noted during your last appointment that you seemed less anxious and more comfortable discussing your living situation. That's because things have been different since she learned about the trust." "Exactly. Which brings us to the central question your husband asked me to consider. Is your daughter capable of sustained change, or is this merely a performance designed to secure her inheritance?" Mr. Wright leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Morrison, your husband gave you complete control over this decision. The trust can be activated immediately, transferring the funds to you, or we can establish a probationary period to see if your daughter's improved behavior continues." "What kind of probationary period?" 6 months. During that time, I would check in with you monthly to assess your daughter's treatment of you. If she maintains respectful, caring behavior for the full 6 months, she would inherit the trust. If she reverts to her previous patterns, the funds transfer to you automatically." I stared out the window at the small garden visible from his office. Robert had been so wise, giving me this choice rather than making it for me. He knew I needed to be the one to decide what I could and couldn't accept from our daughter. "There's something else," Mr. Wright said gently. "Your husband also established a separate fund specifically for your independence, regardless of what happens with Gaia's inheritance. It's enough to secure comfortable housing and care for the rest of your life." My breath caught. "He did?" "He wanted you to know that you never have to stay anywhere you don't want to be. You have options, Mrs. Morrison. Real options." That evening, I asked Gaia to sit with me in the living room. She perched on the edge of the couch, her whole body tense with anxiety. "Mr. Wright called with his decision," I began. Her face went white, and the investigation confirmed that there was a pattern of mistreatment. Gaia's shoulders sagged, and she put her head in her hands. "So I lose everything?" "Not necessarily." She looked up hopefully. "What do you mean?" "I've been given a choice. I can activate the trust clause immediately, or we can try a 6-month probationary period." "Probationary?" "If you can maintain the kindness and respect you've shown me these past 2 weeks for 6 full months, you'll inherit the trust as your father intended. But if you revert to treating me the way you did before, the money comes to me instead." Gaia stared at me for a long moment. "Why would you give me that chance, after everything I put you through?" "Because despite everything, I still hope my daughter is in there somewhere. And because your father believed people could change if they had the right motivation." Tears started flowing down her cheeks. "I don't deserve this." "No, you don't. But families aren't about deserving. They're about choosing to love each other enough to do better." Over the next 6 months, I watched my daughter struggle with herself daily. Some days were easier than others. There were moments when I could see her old impatience trying to surface, but she would catch herself, take a breath, and choose kindness instead. She moved me to the master bedroom when Marcus's back injury required a ground floor room. She included me in family decisions. She introduced me to her friends as someone she was proud to have as a mother, not ashamed to be burdened with. Most importantly, she started asking about my life before her, about my dreams and interests that had nothing to do with being her mother. For the first time in years, I felt seen as a complete person. The breakthrough came in month 4. Gaia had had a terrible day at work and came home in a foul mood. I was in the kitchen and I accidentally dropped a glass, sending it crashing to the floor. I saw the old Gaia flash across her face, the irritation, the cruel words forming on her lips. But then she stopped, really looked at me standing there with my hands shaking, clearly expecting to be yelled at. Instead, she knelt down and started picking up the pieces. "Are you okay, Mom? Did you cut yourself?" "No, I'm fine. I'm sorry about the glass." She stood up and hugged me. Really hugged me. You don't have to apologize for accidents. I'm the one who should be sorry for making you afraid to make mistakes in your own home. At the end of 6 months, Mr. Wright called to congratulate Gaia on inheriting her trust fund. But by then, the money felt secondary to what we'd both gained. You know what's funny? Gaia said as we sat on the porch watching the sunset that evening. I spent 3 years resenting you for being here, for needing care, for complicating my life. But now I can't imagine this house without you. Your father knew, I said quietly. He knew that underneath all that anger and selfishness, there was still the little girl who used to tell me she loved me every night before bed. I do love you, Mom. I'm sorry it took the threat of losing money to make me remember how to show it. I reached over and took her hand. We all need motivation sometimes. The important thing is that you chose to grow when given the chance. A year later, Gaia and Marcus used part of the inheritance to add a beautiful in-law suite to the house, not because they had to, but because they wanted me to have my own space while still being close to family. The suite has its own entrance, a small kitchen, and a view of the garden that's now flourishing under both our care. I think about Robert often, especially when I see Gaia being patient with elderly customers at the store, or when she volunteers at the senior center on weekends. He didn't just protect me with that trust. He gave our daughter a chance to become someone worthy of being protected. Some people might say Gaia's change was artificial, motivated by money rather than genuine love. But I've learned that the source of motivation matters less than the choice to act on it. Every day, Gaia chooses kindness over cruelty, patience over irritation, love over resentment. And every day I choose to believe that this is who she really is. Not the angry, selfish woman who called me disgusting, but the caring daughter who now makes sure I never feel unwelcome in my own family again. Robert's greatest gift wasn't the money. It was giving us both a second chance to love each other the way family should. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.